We made this compilation in case you missed some of our videos. You can watch this if you're looking for something to do, if you're bored, you want something in the background, or you're looking to hear about Stranger Teas. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel, turn on the notification button so next time you can't sleep, you know where to go. Leave the timestamps of the videos that you want to recommend to others in the comments section. Let's begin. What is a dirty business tactic that you know and everyone should be aware of it? Story 1. I kept getting phone calls for a timeshare company. I agreed to come out on my day off to claim my prize. I walked around with a sales guy that kept trying to hard sell me on the buying in aspect of it. At the end, they sat me down at a table and tried to get me to give up $8,500 of my cash. I told him no. He came back and dropped it to $6,000. I said no again. He went off and talked to his manager, and he came back with a fantastic one-time deal of $4,500, and I said no again. He finally asked me why I came if I wasn't remotely interested, and I explained that his company kept calling me to get my butt in the seat. And even though I told the phone person I wasn't interested in a timeshare, that they kept calling, so if they were going to waste my time, I decided to waste his. I have never gotten a phone call from them again. Sometimes it's worth some of your time to pay them off to get taken off the list. Story 3. Fake reviews. I worked for a startup that had a sleazy CEO and got most, if not all, of their business by fake Yelp, Google, Glassdoor, and other review sites in our industry. The CEO was a compulsive liar and had no morals. Side note, I left the company and crap went straight downhill as it was a house of cards anyway and I had a key position. The CEO ended up calling his business partner of 3 years and telling him that all the money was gone and he is leaving the country forever, then didn't leave. He still has the company open with a much smaller staff and can only imagine what he is saying to keep it afloat. Okay, done with the rant. It is easy to fake reviews now since they are usually a bit more eccentric and polished, and I have lost all faith in them. Yeah, I've gotten to a point where the only positive reviews I kind of trust are 3- and 4-star reviews that definitely have some complaints but otherwise like the product enough to recommend it. Anytime I see a glowing 5-star review, I get real, "How do you do, fellow kids?" energy. Story 6. A local lawn maintenance business takes advantage of unsuspecting customers in 3 ways. 1, on monthly bills, they double the state tax. Instead of being, say, 6%, it'll actually be 12% if you check the math. 2, without discussing it with the homeowners, they charge double for double cuts when the grass is a little taller in areas than usual. So if you had agreed to pay $50 per mowing, the monthly bill says $100 for each visit. They never ask, they just do it and charge double. In most cases, it's just a small patch of the yard that has taller grass, not the entire thing. 3, they're supposed to mow once per week, but without telling customers first, they start mowing every 5 days, which means they get to charge for more mowing visits per month than necessary. I just don't think I would want to pay someone to do my lawn. Some days it's my excuse to get out and get a little activity, and frankly, it's prime podcast listening time. But if I did pay someone, you can be damn well sure I would be furious if they pulled up like this. Story 8. People lie about salary, starting pay, raises, etc. all the time. Learn to play hardball. For a multi-million-dollar company, another 10 to 20K is nothing. My office had a lockdown on raises over 3%, and going into an annual review, I learned that my boss had lied and underpaid me for the starting position. He claimed they had a $60,000 budget for the position and couldn't exceed it. I found out the last person in the job got paid $75,000. So I got an offer from a competitor over double my current pay. They knew they couldn't afford to lose me with the amount of work coming in, and slid my offer letter over to my boss during the review. They matched the offer, gave me a $10,000 bonus up front, and even cut me into a percentage of a business line. The meeting was awkward as hell, and it was difficult to do, but it's business. I hate confrontation, but I've had to do this. When I took over delivery supervising for the bakery I worked at, I knew the previous supervisor was paid $14.50 an hour. When I took the job, the owner of the company said $12.50 was the starting pay and not a penny more. So I said, the previous guy was a close friend, told me it was $14.50, and I know you'll work me to death. You can pay me $14.50 or I, the only person who knows the routes and orders, will quit right here and now. I got my 1450. Listen to the OP, folks. Play hardball. Story 12. If you're going to ask for add-ons with purchasing a vehicle, such as a Hitch receiver, check Amazon for part prices and YouTube for installation difficulties. I had a salesman consult the shop to see how much this would cost for a Grand Caravan. He said it was going to be just over $1,000 after my purchase of the vehicle. Well, I didn't purchase from him, but months later installed one myself in less than an hour, in part due to the vehicle containing bolts already installed in the frame for a receiver. The name brand receiver only cost me $100. They were going to charge me $900 for an hour of labor. It's rough, but there are a lot of shady shops and dealers out there that will absolutely screw you over on things like this. Do yourself a favor and become good friends with someone mechanically minded, or really do your research on a good shop in your area. Story 16. The bestsellers book lists are not actually based on the number of books sold to consumers. They are based on the number of books sold by the distributor. So if someone like Bill O'Reilly wanted to claim he had the best-selling book in America, his publisher could use a third-party clearinghouse to order 1 million copies of the book at a highly discounted rate, like 50 cents a book. The clearinghouse can then turn around and sell those books to Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, etc., at a highly discounted rate, which is why you see certain authors, like Bill O'Reilly, always in the bargain bin. But even if nobody bought those books at the store level, the distributors can still report that 1 million copies of the book have been sold. It's honestly wild just what places like this are able to get away with. It's almost like you can't trust big businesses because they care more about money than the people they're taking that money from. Weird. Story 19. Debt collectors will have detectives call you from a number that appears to be a legitimate law enforcement agency when you Google it. It's actually a spoofed caller ID using a legitimate agency's fax number. The detective will threaten arrest and throw around names of local judges. The debt collector will claim to not know the detective who left the message, but will be willing to take care of your debt. Edit time. Yes, it's illegal, but it's very hard to prove, and that's why they do it. Law enforcement or courts will only call you in the case of theft, like a hot check, but will never call for an old debt. It's civil, and they don't have jurisdiction. I know a lot of people work jobs for less than moral companies at times, like Walmart, banks, you name it. I don't hold it against them, because we all need to make a living, and sometimes choices are sparse. But folks who do debt collecting and resort to sleazy, unethical practices, I just don't have sympathy for them. Those jerks. Story 23. The three-tiered pricing approach, especially for things like roofing or basement waterproofing. The contractors start with a ridiculously high-priced quote for way more stuff than you asked for, steps down to a more moderate quote of what you wanted with a few bells and whistles, then the third quote is what you requested. This gives you the illusion of choice and reduces sticker shock because although your requested absolute minimum service is really expensive, it's only half the cost of their recommended repairs. By the time I'm done with this thread, I'm not going to trust a single business out there. Time for me to pack up all my things, go live in a cottage in the woods, and just do all my own home repairs and everything. It'll be a harrowing but fulfilling 3 months of my now much shorter but freer life. Yay. Story 25. If thou art in Sweden and want to start a company, don't pay for anything. It's totally free via verksamt.se and Skatteverket.se, and anyone that tries to make you pay for handling paperwork or something to do with the startup administration is probably a scam. This happened to my friend that lost about 2,000 kronar. Edit. Spelling. Look, you can change the spelling however you want. There's no way I will pronounce those Swedish words correctly. I just hope I got the currency right. I could go check online, but what are you going to do if I got it wrong, Sweden? Come at me. Story 28. Be careful if your friend from high school messages you out of the blue on Facebook. They have something to sell you or some pyramid scheme they want you to join. Edit. Might. Edit 2. Multi-level marketing companies ruin/tarnish the relationships between family and friends of people that work for them. If you've never had someone try to rope you into an MLM, I envy you. I've had quite a few folks try to turn me on to MLMs in the past, including family and friends, and it is really hard to not just say, You know this is a scam, right? You are literally trying to rope me into a scam so I can lose money and then try to get other people to lose money so some jack-off at the top gets all our money. But you feel bad because they're a victim, so you just keep trying to find ways to politely turn them down, but they just keep pestering you. Story 32. Buying a car from a buy here, pay here dealership. You put $500 to $1,000 down. They say you are approved and you can drive the car home. 2 days later, the dealership calls and says that they couldn't get you financed at that down payment and interest rate, so we need an additional $2,500 down, and your interest rate doubles. If you don't have the extra money, they take the car and your original down payment. This is in Arizona. This is a few strikes already against car dealerships. Then again, I think a lot of us are already well aware of just how shady dealerships can be. Story 49. It's not dirty as it's legal, but there is a reason that stores ask you to donate some amount to a charity or fund. They can use your donation to help them get a tax write-off. Okay, as much as stores are sleazy in so many ways, this one isn't true, at least if the stores are actually acting within the law. When that cashier asks if you want to donate to whatever charity, the stores are legally acting as collection agents for your gift and cannot claim that on their business receipts or income. The donation should actually appear on your receipt so you can claim it if you want. I've heard people spouting this as fact a few times, but it is one of the few times where stores aren't actually being greedy. I mean, they might be getting publicity, or maybe the charity paid them to collect donations, I don't know, but they don't get to claim the donations. When adopted kids track down their real parents, and it all went wrong. Story 1. Adopted at birth. I'm 26 currently and have never wanted to know anything about my biological parents. Last Father's Day of old days, right? I received a Facebook message from a random man asking if I was adopted. It was a few details of his daughter's date of birth. They all matched, and boy did I look like him. We talked a bit. He sent me a picture of his daughter at birth. Yep, that was me. Still not wanting to believe this random man was my biological father, I told him I would contact that adoption center with his name to see if they would give me any information. My adoption was a closed private adoption. The center called me back 3 days later to confirm that this man was my biological father. They confirmed my biological mother's name as well, all over the phone without any verification or anything. I was dumbfounded. I cried, was anger, about every emotion you could think of. Informed the biological father that I was indeed his biological daughter, then was told I have 2 biological brothers, one barely a year older than me and one 4 years younger. Biological mother also has a slew of other kids, as does he, came to a total of 2 siblings and 9 half-siblings. I grew up an only child. The kicker was that the biological mother is and always has been a drug addict. She lost all her kids. Every one of my siblings is completely effed up. They all have kids. My teenage half-sister has a 4-year-old. Most have been in jail and have no contact with their parents. I spoke to the biological mother twice. She gave off the piece of crap vibe the second I started talking to her on Facebook, so I blocked her and forgot that ever happened. The biological father wasn't much better in my opinion. He was with a new woman with 3 kids and barely speaks to his biological children from other women. I grew up in a close family. We talked all the time and are involved in each other's lives. This guy claimed to want to get to know me and meet me, talk to me on the phone, blah, 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 but it just never followed through. So I cut those ties and haven't talked to him since either. I've talked to most of my siblings. The younger bio brother and I talk every few months. Half siblings and I talk every few days. I really wanted to get to know them and build relationships with these people that are blood related to me, but they have such terrible, sad lives that we really can't keep a conversation going. So it ends up just being a few sentences exchanged every few days about how their lives are crap and what is going wrong now. I'm a positive person in a good place in my life, and my husband is worried I'm going to get taken advantage of. So I keep my distance. All in all, it was a terribly disappointing situation, and I wish it had never happened. I can't even imagine how tough that would be to go through. I'm a firm believer in that the family that matters is the family you choose, and those that have impacted your life. Biological/blood relation doesn't mean those people are your real family or that they need to be a part of your life if you don't want that. The people who love you and support you our real family. Story 2. I was adopted at birth. I can't remember a specific time that I asked if I was adopted or when my parents told me. I've just always known. My birth parents were both 18-wheeler truck drivers with not much of a permanent address, so they decided to put me up for adoption. Growing up, they would send birthday or Christmas cards every few years, and then I stopped hearing from them completely for about 5 years. One day, I got a random phone call from my birth father stating that my birth mom had lung cancer and she didn't have long to live, and if I was ever going to come meet them, now would be the time. I was devastated that my birth mom was so sick and that these were the terms in which I was going to meet them. They moved into their parents' house in Ohio when they passed. My adopted parents have always been supportive of me having a relationship with my biological parents and understood that I wanted to go meet my family. They went with me, and we flew to Ohio a few days after the phone call. We stayed in a hotel that night, and the next day I went to meet my biological parents. I will never forget that day, pulling up to their small one-story house with a fenced-in front yard. I got out of the car, and they were waiting for me on the front porch. It was weird, like I know these people, but have never met them. I immediately felt a deep connection with them. It's weird finally seeing the genetics you come from for the first time. My birth mom looked very sick, but she still never stopped smiling and cooked one of the best roast beefs I've ever had. I ended up meeting my whole extended family that day. I found out I have 5 half-brothers and sisters and that I'm an uncle. I never expected that, and my young nieces and nephews were so excited to get to meet me. I was overwhelmed with emotion and love for these people I hardly knew. I'm so glad I got that opportunity to meet them, especially my birth mom. My birth mom passed away November 27th, 2011. I unfortunately was unable to make it to the funeral, and I haven't been able to bring myself to go see her grave or contact my birth father or family. I have been to a therapist about this, and I plan on finally going up there this November on the anniversary of her passing. It is something I need to do for closure. Thank you for reading my long rant. I've never really told this story before. I'm really hoping to reconnect with my birth family. I would really enjoy having them in my life again. I'm glad you were able to make a positive connection, as I know that isn't always the case. I hope you're able to reconnect in the way you want and that you get that closure. Story 4. My best friend was adopted at a very young age. She got information from the adoption agency about her birth mother and older brother. She looked up her brother on Facebook and arranged a meeting with him. That went extremely well. They immediately bonded. She got her birth mother's phone number and called her. They talked a few times, exchanging their life stories and hopes to meet each other soon. Birth mother lived in a different state. After a few weeks of talking over the phone, they set up a weekend to meet. The first day they met was filled with hugs, joy, and my friend got to meet her half-brothers. The next few days, she got to see how her birth mother really was. She ignored my friend after the first day and was incredibly rude. My friend returned home and realized her birth mother wasn't all she hoped she would be, so she stepped back with contacting her, but stayed in contact with her brothers. Her mom, adopted mother, is a wonderful woman, and she now realizes how lucky she is to have her. She was disappointed in knowing that she was put up for adoption because her birth mother is a piece of crap, but she is happy she now has a fantastic mother. Story 5. My birth mother found me on the internet in 2005. I had registered on adoption.com 10 years earlier. She had realized she was pregnant after she had broken up with my father and he had moved overseas. She never even told him, and he died in 2000, never knowing I existed. I will never meet her again, as no one in her family, including possibly her husband, knows about me. We exchange emails and pictures. I despise my high school graduation picture, worst picture of me ever taken. She found it online and sent me hers from 20 years earlier. We are twins. It is uncanny. She hates hers, too. The funny thing is, I did some research on Ancestry.com for my dad, who has a very unusual Hungarian name, so now I know I am part Hungarian. Turns out he married and had a son who has the same name as me. I emailed that to my birth mother, and she wrote back and said she, too, had another son, and he has the same name as me, too. Yes, it is a common American name, but still, it is funny that I have 2 brothers, and we all have the same name. I'm now thinking of contacting my dad's son. I have survived cancer and would love to have a little more medical history. I'm sorry to hear about your biological father passing before you could meet him, and that your mother's family doesn't know about you, but hopefully you can foster some good relationships through this in the end. Story 7. I have an honest question for anyone else who was adopted like myself. If you have sought out your biological parents, why? I was adopted nearly immediately after birth and have known only one family my entire life. I have one sister, also adopted. My mom passed away when I was 19, currently 27, and I'm living close with my dad. I've honestly never even had the slightest urge to seek out my biological parents, and this seems to mystify people when I tell them. For one, it seems like it would be insulting and awkward for my real family, and yes, they're my real family. Second, my birth parents have been complete strangers to me now for 27 years. I could have bumped into them a dozen times now for all I know. They made a mistake in high school and made the responsible decision to ensure I had a better life, and I did, and for that I'm forever grateful, but that's where our connection ends. Like I said, I personally am content in my decision, but I honestly would love to hear opinions from both sides of this. I'm not adopted, as I'm sure is obvious from my previous comments, but this has always been my line of thinking as well. However, I think I can understand why some folks might be interested. Pleasantly enough, a number of these stories have had really positive reunions, which is what I think a lot of them hope for. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe something else, but I don't begrudge any adopted person who wants to find out. I just hope they realize that blood relations mean as much as you want them to mean. Story 10. So I found my parents on Facebook a few years back. I was able to find their full names because the adoption agency that sent me letters from them made a mistake and forgot to remove their last name and address for privacy reasons. I sent my birth mother a message on Facebook and ended up talking to her. My birth mother actually married my biological father and had 2 more kids after me, so it's kind of like the family I would have belonged to if I wouldn't have been adopted. I met her once, and she is nice. It's a little weird, honestly. I consider my mom and dad who adopted me to be my real parents, and my birth mom and dad to be my biological parents. Can I just say, I know the title of this thread was about it all going wrong, but thank heavens that for most of these people it hasn't been awful. Not all great, but at least for the most part I'm glad that folks aren't going through emotional trauma. Plenty enough of that in the world, if you ask me. What's the quickest way you've seen a friend up their life? Story 1. He used to be really cool in middle school, to the point where I envied him. He wasn't a popular kid, but he got along with most everybody, got straight A's, and had an awesome family that traveled extensively. There wasn't a single negative aspect to this guy's life. Things changed when we got into 8th grade, however. He started displaying toxic attention-seeking behavior by getting in trouble constantly. There was a point where he got suspended twice in 1 week because he was so disruptive. This was totally out of his character, and I realized it, but he was my best friend, and I chalked it up to him being a goof. Middle school ended, and we got into high school, which is where his behavior really started to decline. Instead of hanging out with me or his friend circle that he had built up for years, he wanted to hang out with all the scummy potheads and druggies. His father was a medical marijuana caregiver, Michigan, so all the broke potheads' eyes lit up at the notion of free and plentiful weed, leading to many fake friends. His attendance at school went from spotty to showing up once a week to not showing up for 4 months. All he did was skip school with his friends and do whatever drugs they could get their hands on. He avoided me, alienated me, and straight up started acting like we hadn't been best friends for 4 years prior. I still tried to keep the friendship and got hurt multiple times in the process. Eventually, he moved away with his family to the middle of nowhere about an hour from me, and he doesn't do anything. He will literally sit in his room all day, every day, snorting absurd amounts of Adderall and never gets off his phone. The few times I went to visit him at his new house, it was like talking to a brick wall. He had changed from a nice young man into a distant, apathetic and I couldn't take it. The last time I saw him was about 2 years ago, and I have no plans of seeing him in the future. It's just not worth the effort to try and revive a dead friendship, in my opinion. Honestly, it kind of sounds like your friend is dealing with some stuff, like depression or who knows what. He might actually need some therapy or medication. Thing is, even if his life looks perfect, there could be stuff you don't know about, or even just a chemical imbalance. I hope he gets some help. Story 2. A coworker's wife effed up her life by marrying him. He was close to 30, and she was 17 when they met at a Renaissance fair. Wound up getting married a couple months later. They had to involve her parents since she was underage. The night of their wedding, he encouraged her to get it on with his best friend's wife in the back seat of the car while they drove around. The week after she turned 18, he took her to a strip club, and either that week or the following, he got her to dance in an amateur night competition, which she won. Within a week or so of that, she was a full-time stripper. She had multiple girlfriends that she would hang out with. Her husband was fine with this because, as he put it, I provide a different service. She wound up getting addicted to drugs and then selling drugs. They got a divorce. All the above occurred within a 6-month time frame. The girl was several states away from where she had grown up, isolated from any positive influence and completely dependent on her job as a stripper and her drug-dealing coworkers. Story 4. There was this guy I knew for the better part of a decade. He was always the life of the party, but also had his crap together. He had a serious long-term job while most of us were still college kids. He was the first of my peers to buy a house. He was always in a serious long-term relationship. One day, the police show up at his house. They have a search warrant and take all the computers in the house. He rented rooms out to several friends. Turns out he had downloaded a prodigious amount of onto his girlfriend's laptop. I don't know all the details, but I know he didn't go to prison. His girlfriend dumped him, obviously. He was put on probation where he couldn't leave the city, so he had to quit his job. He moved out of his own house and into a halfway house. He stopped paying his mortgage and the house was foreclosed. Auction was just last week. I'm sorry. I have sympathy for people who make a lot of different kinds of mistakes, but getting into crap like that is crossing way over the line. Frankly, it sounds like they went lenient on him and he should be thankful he didn't go to prison. Story 5. Gambling addiction. Fruit machines, slot machines. Blew all his salary, hawked himself, maxed out the cards, the usual. With a colleague, took a client out for lunch and abandoned both to play the machine he'd spotted in the bar. Our company was offered a free exhibition stand at an event in northern England, and he was detailed to go up there and man it. He didn't have the money to get there, let alone pay for a night in a hotel, even though he'd get the money back on expenses, so he didn't go. Fired, and it got worse from there. A relative who's been in addiction rehab, it's not all for drugs people, declared recently that he was glad he only had a coke habit. He reckoned the gambling addicts were the worst of the lot, with the smallest chance of breaking the circle. Bet you they're not, I replied. He did smile, but wanly. Story 7. A friend of mine I knew since primary school, UK in the 90s, so about 7 or 8 years old, lost his mother to a sudden and unexpected brain aneurysm when he was 21. She was a single parent with no immediate family living in a rented house. The only thing he inherited was a second-hand car. Said friend sold said car for a pittance, which he spent on drugs and alcohol within a month. He then, faced with homelessness, moved in with my parents. T'd moved out by this point, where he lied about having a job for another month. When he was found out, waking up after noon every day for a week was the giveaway, he was asked to leave. He eventually got his life together some years later, but it was a rocky road and a scary reminder of how close a naive young adult can be to destitution. I'm really sorry to hear what he went through, because losing a mother like that can really mess a person up. I'm glad he's doing better now, and hopefully that's a time in his life he can learn from and put behind him. Story 9. Cousin of mine had never smoked weed before, so he decided to try it for his birthday. Not knowing anything about it, he went out and bought synthetic weed and smoked it by himself. He freaked out and thought he was dying, so he tried to call an ambulance. I'm not sure what happened, but instead of an ambulance, a cop showed up and my cousin got scared and hid. The officer eventually found him, and my cousin proceeded to punch the officer and was promptly tackled to the ground and arrested. The cop fractured his hand tackling my cousin, so they added that to the charges of assaulting a police officer. Folks who know me know I'm a supporter of the devil's lettuce, but if you are of legal age and planning to try it somewhere where it is also legal, do it with some folks you can trust who are experienced. Electric cabbage is pretty darn safe, but if you take too much or freak out, it's great to have a friend there to anchor you. Story 12. In high school, he was left with a $1.5 million inheritance from his grandmother. He had already secured a scholarship to some prestigious school across the country. All that went down the drain. He stopped going to school, lost his scholarship, bought a house, and partied away most of the rest of the money. Within 6 months, he was broke. After another 6 months, he had lost the cars, the toys, and the house. My buddy actually bought a jet ski off him for real cheap because he needed money. Last heard he was working construction and living in a hotel. Don't trust a 17-year-old kid with $1.5 million. I think a lot of folks with a lot of money want to make sure their kids and grandkids are taken care of, but never really realize how poorly prepared most people are to deal with getting that kind of money, especially a kid. Story 16. A friend of mine from high school went to a university where he had quite a bit of scholarship money to attend. He was driving on a road trip and got pulled over while a friend and him were hotboxing. They both got arrested, and he almost lost all his scholarships. The only reason he didn't was that his friend took all the charges. I'm not against weed, but make sure you know that it can have certain consequences. Yeah, also, as much as I do indeed love me some jazz cigarettes, you don't smoke and drive, damn it. It's right up there with drinking and driving, and if you do that crap, then I'm gonna think less of you. You're putting other people's lives at risk, so be smarter. Story 18. I have a friend who had gotten 2 bachelor's degrees, economics and political science, and wanted to get into politics. He hung around with the same friends from high school, some of which are not very good people. While hanging out with one of them, he got drunk and ruined his future. He was arrested for DUI, resisting arrest, and assaulting an officer. He hasn't found full-time employment since. I don't know, the way politics have been going, a DUI almost seems kind of tame. Frankly, he might just be thinking ahead and trying to fit in with the rest of them, so he's got some stories to share on the Supreme Court or something. Ugh. Story 23. One guy I knew had the great idea to drink alcohol and then drive extremely speedy. It ended when his car wrapped itself nicely around a tree. Guy was 19, had massive brain damage afterwards, and lives in a disabled home since then, unable to form proper sentences, walk, or do anything actually. Just don't drink and drive, guys. If you're gonna drink, give your keys to someone. Do whatever you can. Get an Uber, call a cab, get a friend, whatever. I've lost friends to this crap, folks, so please just be smart about it. What is the thing a customer has asked you? Story 1. I work at an Italian restaurant, and this guy was looking at ordering a salad, and when I asked what dressing he wanted, he kept going back to the pasta sauces and asking sugo. That would be good on it, wouldn't it? I'll get that. And I tried to explain, sir, those are for the pastas. You got the Mediterranean salad. And he responded, you're right, maybe carbonara. Another sauce. I don't get what he wasn't understanding. He seemed like a normal, smart dude, but he just couldn't comprehend the difference between the dressings and sauces. Reminds me of a lady who assumed everything on the menu was some kind of omelet. I'll take the skirt steak omelet. You? That's actually just a skirt steak. Perhaps I could substitute the French fries for eggs? Oh, it's not an omelet? How about this Greek salad omelet? Man, that's just a Greek salad. The egg dishes are on this side of the menu, and the ones that are omelets say omelet in the description. Eventually, she picked an omelet that she ended up really liking, but another guy at her table sent back his croque monsieur because he thought it would be an omelet. I don't know what made them think we were an omelet restaurant or something. The guy sent back a croque monsieur? Who would do that? They're delicious. Then again, you could put an egg on it, turning it into a croque madame, and call it an omelet. Maybe he would like that. Story 2. Oh man, as a former public librarian, I could write a book. Some of my favorites. How do you interpret the VIN on a car? Not a dumb question in and of itself, but she wanted to know if it told the day of the week on which the car was made. She wanted to avoid a car made on a Friday since they would only be thinking of the weekend. Also wanted to avoid Mondays as they'd be hungover. Do you have a K? After several moments of confusion, I figure out that he really was asking me if I had a paper K hanging around. Why did the praying mantis on my porch die? She called 4 times in one afternoon. Do you have pictures of Apollo? For a school project. Showed her numerous images. She wasn't satisfied. Finally realized she wanted an actual photo. Do I start with photography being a relatively new invention or that Greek gods aren't real? Numerous people asking, how much is this book if I just buy it now? Do they think they're at Barnes & Noble? Weekly, people asking how to make a color copy from a black and white image. It got to the point where I jokingly tell them the little coloring gnomes inside the copier only work on Thursdays. Story 3. I used to be a receptionist at a local branch of UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Emergency Fund. And people would call in at least once a week with a variant of this. Caller. Hi, how can I volunteer with UNICEF in Africa? Me. Well, you need to contact UNICEF International in New York City. We don't actually send volunteers in the field from this office. Caller. Oh, well, I need to go next week or some other unreasonable time limit. How do I do that? Me. I'm pretty sure that the application will take more than a week. They'll need to make sure you have the qualifications they're currently looking for. Caller. Qualifications? Me. Yes, mostly they need professionals in the medical field or teachers with experience working with nonprofit organizations or even sometimes translators or international lawyers, although those two don't usually get sent out of the country they are based in. Caller. I'm unemployed and don't really have any experience in any field, so they can't just send me to Africa next week because I can go now. Or something similar. Me. No. That's pretty strange, but also I have to wonder why those folks wanted to go to Africa right away. Now that's a thread I would like to read. Story 4. For my name. Not the question itself, but the reason why he asked. I was volunteering as cashier at a used bookstore for the library. Not my regular job, but I do it often. In comes this older fella who buys a big stack of books for like $10. He was really nice and chatty, though he didn't seem completely aware mentally. Not a big deal, I just had to explain sales tax and the book pricing a couple times before he seemed to get it. He pays by credit card, and I explained to him how to sign the touchscreen for the payment to go through. This is where he asks for my name. I tell him. He takes the iPad and says he really appreciated my service and happily tells me he's going to sign my name for the card so they will know to send the money to me. Before I can say, no, wait, he submitted the signature. I can't see his receipt, but he keeps telling me I was great and to keep the change, so I can assume he was being legit. I honestly wouldn't call it just bizarre. Made me wonder if he's been signing cashiers' names the entire time he's had a credit card. Thank goodness the card companies never check those things. Story 5. What's the internet? I used to work for an authorized Apple retailer, and one day this old woman, probably in her late 70s or 80s, came in to ask why her phone was acting up. Well, it was a 4GB iPhone 4 and had no storage left. She understandably did not understand her smartphone and when upgrades could be required. I did my best to explain that she would need to upgrade to a device with more storage so it would work the way she wanted, and she could keep all of the pictures of her family. All she would have to do is transfer them through the iCloud system over the internet. That's when she asked this question: what's the internet? In that moment, she had tears running down her face as she truly did not understand a thing I explained prior and felt hopeless. I had to take my lunch break, so I handed her off to my store manager to take over. When I clocked back in, she was still in the store, this time at the checkout counter with her brand new iPhone 6S that my manager had sold her to meet a monthly sales quota. And I'm sure he never told her what the internet was. Honestly, I know it's the oldest meme around, but I would have just told her that it's like a series of tubes carrying information. And in fact, I have done that when dealing with old customers interested in buying a computer. Story 6. I work in a sort of outdoor ski shop, so in summer it's obviously slower and they push tents and chairs and general camping hiking gear. We usually gave some chairs on display outside the store as well as extra chairs inside for people to grab. One customer saw a chair, saw the same one inside, came up to us and asked, "Do you have any of these in stock?" It took us a few seconds to answer because we weren't sure if we heard right, and that was apparently too long for her. She stormed out of the shop saying, "You people are obviously no good at your job. You should find something else to do with your lives." She even emailed and complained to head office, who asked us what happened. We sent in the security footage, and now she is banned. She is someone who came in often and didn't spend much. One colleague went up to her once and smiled and asked if she needed any help, so she snapped, "Yes, you can help me by leaving me the F alone," and stormed out of the store, leaving my colleague struck. Story 8. I work at a college's IT department. My third day in, this 50 to 60-year-old woman tries to convince me to change her username on a different college's website. When I explained I couldn't, she freaked out and yelled until a longtime worker came up and blatantly said, "We don't do that." This woman, I've learned, has a complaint to the dean from almost every department on campus. She's not allowed in here 3 years later. Other notable things she's tried or said that I've had to save my coworkers from: trying to get a newbie to write her paper for her. Cussed out a coworker for saying that he wouldn't convince her professor not to turn in her paper. Demanded we keep our computer lab open and we need to stay for over 2 hours past our closing time so she can do her homework. When we said no, she said, "I have cancer, you need to do what I ask." When we said no, she cussed us out and refused to leave. We called security and our boss. She punched a security guard. Not only does it feel like she is making up the cancers thing, but even if she isn't, folks, don't make employees stay late at a place for your own wants. I know places like that are there to serve, but respect their time, dang it. Story 11. I got one yesterday at work. Guy calls in furious that his bill is showing he owes $180 for the month. Understandably so. I let him know that the bill is wrong. A supervisor the guy spoke with previously cleared out the payment for the month and May and June, and no payment is due until July 6th. He says over and over he doesn't understand and it doesn't make sense. I phrased it as many ways as I could think of, but he just didn't get it. So he says, "Talk to my fiancé." I was relieved to talk to someone with a brain. I tell her, and she didn't understand either. It was 30 minutes of me resisting banging my head against the desk until it was a bloody pulp. I felt as though I lost massive amounts of brain cells talking to those people. Story time from... Am I still mainly Facts Guy on this channel, or am I mostly... Mr. Facts? When I worked for a cable company on multiple occasions, I had customers come in and pay their bills early, and they would do this the day before their bill arrived in the mail. Without fail, I would have someone screaming at me that, "I already paid this! Why are you charging me?" I would then have to explain that the bills were printed days ago and mailed out, and the mail takes time to get to your house. The number of people who still couldn't understand that was staggering. Story 14. I work at a Starbucks. 3 days ago, I had a customer come order and pay for his drinks, and then he asked for the drinks to be heated to 180 degrees. I asked him what that temperature was in Celsius, assuming he measured his temperature in Fahrenheit. Nope, he meant he wanted his drink heated to 180 degrees Celsius, and he emphasized it was possible as he had heated it to that temperature at the 2 other cafes in the service station, when there are only 2 cafes in total, and they're both Starbucks. Our coffee machines can only heat to a maximum of 85 degrees before the milk starts boiling over, and at 180 degrees his drink would be a cloud of vapor, but he just wasn't having it at all and insisted I was lying. Sir, allow me to call a 6th grade science teacher so they can explain to you that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. If that fails, I should have some fuzzy felt cutouts here that should shed some light on this whole thing. I know I'm being a bit of a but if the guy was insisting and calling someone a liar, then he can take the heat. Story 17. I used to work in computer sales and repairs. Had a customer come up who was maybe 23 years old saying she couldn't get her laptop to open something. So I take it and open it and casually ask, "What is it you can't get open?" She looks at me shocked as I open the laptop screen and tells, "I have been trying for hours to get it open. How'd you do that?" I look at her not knowing how to respond and close it and open it again. She takes it and walks out saying thank you. I took a long look at my computer I was working on and decided that this was the moment that made me quit that job. I feel like you were on some kind of candid camera prank video or something. That is maybe the only possible reason I can come to. Either that or that woman was high as balls. Story 20. I used to work in a school library. We would open it for students during lunch and then close the doors and put out a large closed sign when it got full. I mean a large wheeled easel that the students could read from a ways down the hall and had to walk around as it literally took up half the hallway. Needless to say, students would walk past this sign that says library closed through double closed doors and then try to walk in. My favorite response was, "Did you read the sign?" "No." "Oh, well, if you can't read, you shouldn't be in the library. Goodbye." Your first mistake was expecting teenagers to pay attention. You don't even need to make a second mistake. That first one is pretty all-encompassing. Story 24. Had a conversation with a woman about picking ink for a printer she got. The conversation kept getting more and more ridiculous, and I realized she never owned or probably even used a printer. Because she asked me this gem. "What order do I put the cartridges in if I want to print in yellow?" "Ma'am, what do you mean?" "Well, if I put the black cartridge in first, then where do you put the yellow one? Don't I have to take all the other cartridges out and just leave the yellow one in if I want to print in yellow?" Oh my god, lady, printers are already just one of the worst devices in the tech world to deal with. They are always screwing up and being a pain in the butt, and yet somehow you've managed to think up a way to make them even worse, and now that is probably going to happen. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day. Who was the creepy weird kid at your school? Story 1. Two stick out in my mind. One was a kid in high school. He had all the hallmarks of your standard issue socially awkward nerd in that he couldn't relate to people his own age, had no idea how to blend into a crowd, and was quite smart. The problem was that he also had a temper and would fly off the handle when people teased him. After a while, he became the target of the few very nasty bullies because they wanted to watch him flip out. He flipped out all right. He hit one of them in the face with his math textbook, spine first, broke the bully's nose. That was right after the Springfield and Columbine shooting, so everyone was on edge around the kid, afraid he'd go over the line. He disappeared at the end of junior year, and we never saw him again. The second guy was in college. He was another stereotype, but this time it was the stereotype of the large, drunk, stupid redneck. Always spoke with a pronounced drawl, even though he grew up here in Portland. Had very conservative and loud opinions about anything, and most of it was a regurgitation of stuff from Fox News. He was also sadly a member of my fraternity. What made him creepy was when he got rejected by a girl in the journalism department. He took it very hard, but it soon became a victim complex with him. He thought everyone was out to get him. His MySpace, tells you how long ago this was, posts started to get weirder and weirder, talking about how people hated him, how frustrated he was, how he wanted to just make them stop. We grew concerned, started watching him closely. Then the shooting at Virginia Tech happened, and we realized what he was posting was a sanitized version of what Sung-hee Cho had been writing/recording. We finally called in the college administration when he posted, and I'm quoting verbatim here, "Ave Maria would make a great soundtrack to a shooting spree. It really inspires creativity." The college turned that over to the cops, who got a warrant and searched his house. Confiscated several guns and a ton of ammo, plus several notebooks full of hate writing about the students there. Drawn plans of the school showing shooting angles and lists of people's names. He was held under a mental eval for some time, but never charged with a crime. He really hadn't committed one yet. He moved to Arizona sometime after that, and I haven't heard of him since. Honestly, folks, if you are ever suspicious of someone who might be heading toward doing a school shooting, tell someone. Maybe then they can get some help and you can prevent a disaster. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying and not going into nuance here, but just don't brush things off, okay? Story 2. I was the creep. In 3rd grade, 1997 for me, my parents bought me a hot pink and purple pencil case. Every day before school, I made an effort to get there early so I could spend some time on the playground and grass area. I would spend all of this time immersed in my obsession to collect as many ladybugs as possible, to put them and nothing else in my hot pink and purple pencil case. On a good morning, I could easily get 25 plus ladybugs captured and secured within my pencil box prison in about 10 minutes. Phase 2 of my plan involved filing into my classroom nonchalantly and getting set up at my desk. I crammed everything I needed for school in the small upper part of my 2-bin school desk. The bigger section underneath was where I kept my pencil case, alone. I would stare at it longingly, knowing that only I knew that it was there, waiting. Phase 3 usually came very quickly after Phase 1, as I have no self-control. I can't contain my spaghetti over ladybugs. Boredom would set in, or maybe it was a fleeting feeling of anxiety about my friends in the box. I would stealthily reach into my box and open the pencil case. Sometimes I would prop the pencil box open with a cerulean-colored Crayola. I digress. Phase 5. Ladybugs everywhere. Everybody would panic in the beginning, but as this turned into a routine thing for me, everybody came to expect and accept the plague of ladybugs in the classroom every morning. Story 3. We had a nutcase at my school. She would get obsessive crushes on people and go way over the top to try to get their attention. For example, she once cut her arm in art class and used the resulting blood to write the name of the unfortunate object of her affections on the wall of the corridor in 2-foot letters. She refused to go to lessons until her unwitting beau told her directly to do so. It got to the point where she wouldn't do anything unless he told her to. She'd just sit in the playground. The flip side was that she would do pretty much anything he told her to do. For example, lick the floor, crawl around on all fours for the entirety of lunchtime. I once saw her sitting on the floor amidst a crowd of what must have been about half of the school just queefing, fanny farting all over the place for about half an hour. Used to make up ridiculous stories about herself and then defend their veracity to the point where, if you questioned them, she'd go psycho and start screaming until whichever poor sod had attracted her laser beam focus that week could be fished out of his lesson to tell her to stop. She was pregnant with Anakin Skywalker's baby. Her invisible boyfriend lived in a tree. She was a lion. Roar. She was a vampire, etc. This is one of those instances where I can't help but wonder if there was some trauma or abuse going on at home, and that this was all a cry for help. Obviously, I'm not qualified to say anything for sure, but I hope that girl found some help. Story 4. My best friend and I were the weird, creepy kids in my high school. We were the only two people who dressed goth in the entire school. Mind you, we went to school in a small rural town in Texas. Several students would avoid coming near me in the halls for fear I'd put a hex on them, thinking I practiced witchcraft. My friend experienced similar results from his attire as well. The reason? When I was a sophomore. I started wearing all black because it fit my mood when I was dealing with the aftermath. I tried talking about it to several friends, but given the fact it was a small football-oriented school and town, and my attacker was one of the star players, I was treated worse than garbage by friends and classmates alike. I started dressing in ways that suited my mood, and lo and behold, the town's first goth kid was created. My friend, pretty much my sole friend who didn't turn on me, noticed the effect that my dressing that way had on the Southern Baptist populace. They avoided me like the plague and left me the hell alone. Back then, I was the only person in our school who knew he was gay. However, he was heavily bullied. So he adopted my general style of all black and became our school's second creepy goth kid. We enjoyed the results. Nobody messed with us anymore. We started adding pentagrams and weird symbols and the like to our wardrobes, which increased the effects. Occasionally, one of the jocks would decide to bully my friend, and I would walk up behind them, clutch one of my necklaces, and start chanting in gibberish. It usually resulted in the bully getting scared and running away. The teachers and administration never gave us crap for it because we were straight-A students and were always sweet as can be in class. I think the majority of them understood that we were responding to a crappy situation in the only way we had. This right here is what I'm talking about. People that you might judge as being weird or whatever might just be dealing with trauma. I feel awful for OP having to deal with that in a small town. I hope that life has treated you better since then. Story 10. Way back in middle school, there was this kid named Eric. He was brilliant, or it seemed so at the time, with his schoolwork. He was on honor roll every semester. He was short and anorexic, and he never said a single word to anyone that was deemed social. One day I decided to talk to him, and we shared an interest in music and TV shows. I ended up going to his house one day after school, and my God, I never went back. His entire room was filled up with drawings of dead and lynched black people. All he could talk about was his hatred toward minorities, and it turned out his father was a part of the KKK. This was in Chicago, Illinois. Holy... I want to feel bad because clearly this kid has been brainwashed by his awful racist parent, but getting to that age and drawing stuff like that, that's awful. Story 20. I'll never forget the kid who thought he was a car. You'd see him zooming around school at lunchtime in car mode. Whenever he'd stopped running, he'd pretend to hit the brakes. He even beeped at people. This sounds like pretty standard behavior for a little kid, but this guy did it until he was 16. He left school last year and, not surprisingly, has his driver's license. Say what you want, but if he kept it up for that long, clearly it was meaningful to him. If you got a passion that doesn't hurt someone or isn't a grossest, then more power to you. Which propaganda effort was so successful people still believe it today? Story 1. That touching a baby bird will make its mother reject it. Lies. Put the baby back in the nest if you can. But don't touch baby rabbits. I watched my pet mama rabbit eat all her babies one by one after we handled them. Well, I didn't watch it, but they disappeared pretty fast, and my parents were horrified trying to keep the blood cleaned up so my 7-year-old self wouldn't see the gore. Side note, kids are smart, just be honest with them. I knew it was happening. Oddly enough, that doesn't really apply to wild rabbits, at least not cottontails and swamp rabbits we have here. but I have heard about domestic breeds. This completely depends on how much you handle your rabbits in general. If you raise your rabbits from baby stage right after leaving the mother, your scent will be a part of their world. You will be a part of their family. Source: my cousins raised over a dozen rabbits and bred them off their babies, and they handled all of them all the time. Here's something that's horrifying. Sometimes rabbits just eat their young because they're stressed out, because they feel too crowded, because they feel territorial. Cannibalism happens, but it doesn't happen if you give them enough space, enough free time outside of their cage, expose them to normal everyday sounds so that activity in their area isn't considered dangerous, etc. Lies: put the baby back in the nest if you can. It's more nuanced than that. The average person is better off just leaving it alone. Birds have ways of dealing with this on their own, and your bumbling could potentially hurt the bird, damage the nest, etc. To say nothing of the fact that derping around on the ground is part of many birds' normal life cycle. If you see a baby bird on the ground, mama and papa bird are probably nearby waiting for you to go away. Once, the neighbor kids came to me for help because there was a baby bird on the ground and they thought something needed to be done. Even though it went against everything that made sense to them, I convinced them to leave the bird alone. Its mom would help it. 3 hours later, it was dead, and they probably never believed me again. Apparently, there are no right answers when it comes to helping baby birds. Better to just let nature do its thing, however cruel it might seem. Unless it's a crow, in which case I will raise it to be my best friend. Story 2. That the old woman who sued McDonald's over burning herself with her coffee was just money hungry. For clarity, an elderly woman was a passenger in a car pulled over in the lot to add sugar after getting a coffee and it spilled all over her lap. It burned her really bad, and she just set out to get McDonald's to pay her hospital bills because they served the coffee way too hot. They ended up launching this whole PR campaign where they smeared this poor lady, even taking out spots in local papers over how silly and money-hungry she was. Comedians, musicians, and radio hosts made fun of her and made her out to be money-hungry instead of a victim. Yeah, she had third-degree burns in/on her genitalia. She originally requested that they pay her 5-figure medical bill. They were stonewalled. She sued, and it was the judge who decided to make an example out of them since it was proven that they have been purposefully selling near boiling cups of coffee to discourage refills despite being warned that this was unhealthy and that the cups were not made to hold liquids that hot. I object to anyone who continues to make smart burned genital areas comments to court photos of her. In addition, the payment the judge ordered were the revenues from 2 days' worth of coffee sales for McDonald's. They barely really felt it. Without going into too many details, the words fused and labia could be used to describe the situation. I've had to correct so many people about this. For anyone who doesn't already know, that McDonald's was already known for making their coffee too hot, think nearly boiling when served, and the woman in this case was severely burned on her legs and crotch from the lid also not being put on right. I may have misremembered the lid. It's been a while since I read all of this. McD is covering themselves by making it out that she was just an idiot and they have to put the warning on the lids now because people are stupid. They're half right, but they were very wrong in what they did. This one makes me sad. She had to receive skin grafts over the burned area. Their coffee was kept at a constant temperature of 180 to 190 degrees, which caused third-degree burns in seconds when coming into contact with skin. This lady took an undeserving beating by the media. I remember when this happened in '92 and hearing all the comedians and news spots talking about this greedy woman who was suing McDonald's because coffee is hot. We all joked about it and how dumb she was. I didn't find out the truth about this for like 15 years. McDonald's for their part in covering that up. Story 3. Many Korean people believe that fans can cause death. Even my mother, who moved to America in her mid-teens, still prohibits me from leaving a fan on overnight for fear of death. There is a conspiracy theory that the South Korean government spread this myth as propaganda to prevent energy overuse, but its origins are unknown. It's strange that many Koreans still believe this myth, considering it is one of the most technologically advanced countries. I've also heard that some are covered up by the police reporting that a fan was left on and blaming it on that, publicly at least. Not sure how true that is. I've heard that as well, though it should be noted that a lot of post-war Korean homes were heated by small furnaces with exhaust flues going under the floor, which is why most modern Korean homes have heated floors. The problem being that the furnaces were coal-fired and any leak would result in a deadly carbon monoxide or dioxide, can't remember right now, leak into the home, which may have fueled the fan death myth. It's a real danger. Remember, John Lennon was killed by a fan. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. That's similar to the German concept of Zugluft that people think of as a health-deteriorating force. Zugluft exists where windows, doors open ajar and a movement of cold air occurs, leading to colds, stiff muscles, pneumonia, bronchitis, etc. What is with this? When I lived in Russia, people there were always desperate to stop any airflow through a room. Once in class, my Mexican friend and I were hot on the 4th floor of this ancient building, so we opened the window and propped the door open for a cross breeze, and our teacher flipped out when she showed up. She called the airflow, can't pronounce that, and said it would make us all sick. As a Canadian, I call that fresh air, and I'd never consider it bad. In fact, I'll open a window, albeit briefly, at negative 30 degrees to clear the stale air out of a Roman winter if I'm feeling it. Yeah, while I'm not one of those people who likes to sleep with a fan on, I do love getting a good cross breeze growing. Not only does it keep you cool, but fresh air is just so nice. Story 4. Autism and Vaccines. The original guy wanted to advertise his own vaccine, but did not disclose this when he published a hit piece on the mainstream vaccine at the time in a reputable journal. His alternative vaccine failed, his paper was bashed and ultimately retracted, yet people smart enough to work at Google don't vaccinate their kids. Andrew Wakefield, a former gastroenterologist and the man responsible for this anti-vax show, originally wanted to prove that vaccines were responsible for bowel disease as well as linking it to autism. He was put through a tribunal by the GMC, and it was found that not only had he lied about his research, but he was found to have committed 12 acts of abuse against developmentally disabled children after he put them through unnecessary and invasive procedures. To try and prove that vaccines were responsible for autism and bowel disease, he put young children through unnecessary colonoscopies and lumbar punctures, spinal taps. He was struck off from the medical register and is no longer allowed to practice medicine. He continues to make a living promoting and speaking at anti-vaccine propaganda events. People should remember that. Anti-vaxxers are looking to an abuser found to have put developmentally disabled children through unnecessary medical procedures for advice. Let's not understate how much of a piece of crap the man is. Story 6. That Napoleon Bonaparte was short. He was 5 feet and 7 inches tall, which might be a little on the shorter side by modern standards, but it was around the average height for people back then. The idea that he was short actually came from a British propaganda campaign to mock him. Also, due to starting out as an artillery officer, when he got high rank, he sometimes liked to micromanage the cannons, a job meant for corporals. This earned him the nickname Little Corporal from his troops. It's a term of endearment. The Brits may have heard it and put more emphasis on the little part. It really must be understood how little or petite is often an adjective that suggests endearment in French. Another example, boy/girlfriend, translates to petite amie, petite amie, or little friend. It's also worth noting that his bodyguards were all significantly taller than him, which added to the misconception somewhat, and wore massive hats. The French measurement of a foot was equivalent to about 13 inches of today's inches, so at 5 foot he was actually 5'5" or slightly above. The cheeky Brits knew this. Well, thank heavens we're all taking the time to make sure we know exactly how tall and not short Napoleon was. Frankly, we should all really be talking about Napoleon III, his descendant, who tried to take over, failed, then when his soldiers asked, "What should we do now?" he tried to shoot himself and missed. Seriously, go read up on him. Way more fun. Story 10. Drinking fountains are unhealthy. The bottled beverage industry commissioned and published a series of studies in the early 1990s when they decided to get into the bottled water business. The problem was that their largest competitor was free and available in schools, parks, and public buildings everywhere. Anyone who took even a semester of biology knows that if you walk around and swab and culture anything, you'll find that it's covered in bacteria. That's the ecology of the planet Earth. My school found 3 water fountains that were above the legal limit for lead. Okay, fine, not all water fountains are great. That sounds more like a problem with your school than with water fountains in general. Also, I'm sure there are some folks in Michigan who would take umbrage with this story as well, but that's a whole bigger issue. Story 19. That big curvy line of toothpaste with a Dairy Queen curl we've seen in every toothpaste ad? You don't need more than a pea-sized smear of paste on your brush. I always only used a little pea-sized, but I've also never really thought about the massive squeeze they put on the brush in the commercials, lol. Do you think they did this so you could buy their product faster, meaning you have to buy more? Go through, that's exactly why. Same thing for other things. For example, the Plop Plop Fizz Fizz commercial for Alka-Seltzer showing the person taking 2 tablets. I never really did huge amounts of toothpaste as a kid because when I tried using that much, I would just end up with a bunch of extra toothpaste running out of my mouth. I realized real fast, if it's just pooling out of my mouth, it isn't cleaning my teeth. Seems like a waste. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.